Chapter 7. Class President. "No, get off me!" Jamal screamed. But the creepy dolls chased him through the voodoo emporium. Their button eyes were fixed on the necklace around his neck. He bolted for the door, reaching out to grab the doorknob, but one of the dolls clung to his ankle, tripping him. He went down hard. Wham! "You can't run from us," the dolls shrieked. There were so many of them. "We'll get that necklace back." The dolls swarmed toward him, their button eyes glaring. "No, stay away," Jamal screamed. One grabbed at his arm, another grabbed his leg, and another reached for his neck and the skull necklace. The doll grasped the heavy chain, pulling it and strangling him. "No, please, let me go," Jamal gasped. "I'll give you anything." Suddenly, a dark skeletal shadow with a top hat stretched over Jamal, who was writhing on the floor. "That necklace belongs to me," Dr. Facilia's voice reverberated through the emporium. "You can escape from my friends on the other side." Jamal woke with a start, struggling for breath. He blinked at the bright sunlight streaming through his window. He looked down. His sheets were damp with sweat and tangled around his arms and legs. The skull necklace was twisted around his neck, partially choking him. That explained it. "It was only a dream," he whispered to himself. His throat felt raw, like something really had choked him. It wasn't real, just a terrible nightmare. But the details had been so vivid. The terrifying dolls chasing him through the shop and attacking him. The shadows stretching over him. Dr. Facilia's voice. Even stranger, the dream didn't fade like other dreams did when he awoke. It remained sharp in his mind. He sat up in bed, untwisting the damp sheets from his body. He glanced over at his brother's bed to see if Malik had witnessed his night terror, but it was empty. He felt a rush of relief. That was a small miracle. The last thing he needed was to get teased by his brother on top of everything else. Jamal could hear the shower running in the bathroom across the hall. Malik must have already gotten up for school. He glanced at the clock on the bedside table. "Oh no," he whispered. He was running late. He jumped up and dove for the closet, where he caught sight of his reflection in the mirror on the door. His face looked haunted. Dark circles framed his eyes. His skin looked clammy. The skull necklace dangled from his neck on the heavy chain. The eye sockets on the skull were dark. It wasn't glowing. In fact, it had stopped glowing the second he'd stepped outside of Dr. Facilia's shop. Jamal frowned at it. "Why does he want you so badly?" he said to its reflection. Suddenly, the bedroom door flew open. "Why does who want what?" Jamal jerked around, his eyes falling on Malik, who was wrapped in a towel. His hair was still damp from the shower. He ran his hand through it, shaking off a spray of water. Nothing," Jamal said, quickly pulling on a shirt and tucking the necklace underneath it so it was hidden from view. It was moments like that when he missed having his own room at their old house, before the hurricane flooded it. "Okay, weirdo," Malik said with a roll of his eyes. He paraded to the closet. "But don't make me late for school. It's a big day, remember?" Jamal frowned at his brother while he grabbed more clothes. "Big day? What, are you, like, totally living under a rock or something?" Malik said, shaking his head. He pulled on a t-shirt. "The election results?" "Oh, right," Jamal said. The week before, their class had voted for the next year's class officers. His brother had run for president, of course. Homemade posters featuring Malik's grinning face had been plastered along every school hallway for the past month. Jamal didn't bother running, not even for something less important, like class secretary or treasurer. Nobody at school knew he existed, let alone would be willing to vote for him in an election. "I'm sure you'll win," Jamal added, trying to force himself to sound happy for his brother, but it came out sounding sullen. Oblivious, Malik cracked a cocky grin and pointed at his own reflection, like a politician. Both brothers stared into the mirror. Their reflections were side by side. They looked the same. They were identical twins, after all. Except Jamal looked glum, while Malik beamed. "Yep," he agreed, "and then you'll have to call me Mr. President." "The election results are in," Mrs. Perkins said, clutching them in her hand. She stared at the class through her huge glasses. "Please congratulate your new class president, Malik." Jamal sank down in his desk while all the other kids broke into thunderous applause. Malik stood up and launched into a victory speech, where he promised better snack machines in the cafeteria and more pizza pep rallies before basketball games. Jamal knew he should be thrilled for his brother. Malik loved him and always supported him, even saving him from Colton and the gym class bullies. But all he felt was jealousy eating away at his heart. Combined with the guilt, it was even worse. After announcing the other officers, Mrs. Perkins flicked off the lights and projected their lesson, casting the classroom into darkness. Jamal squinted in the dim light. Her shadow fell across the class, and then, suddenly, it moved. The arms transformed into spiny, ghostly claws. They reached for Jamal's neck and the necklace. "No, don't hurt me!" Jamal shrieked, leaping up and jumping back from the shadow. Under his shirt, the necklace flared with reddish light and singed his chest. Everyone in class turned to stare at him. "Look, he's scared of his own shadow," Colton cracked. The whole class broke into jeering laughter. A spitball smacked Jamal square in the forehead. It stuck, then slid wetly down his cheek. Mrs. Perkins flicked on the lights, causing the shadow to vanish. "Jamal, is everything okay?" she asked. Her forehead crinkled in concern. Yeah. Sorry," he muttered, sliding back behind his desk. When the bell rang, Jamal darted into the hall, slipping by his brother. The fan club glamored around Malik, congratulating him on his victory. Jamal knew he should join them, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, especially not after what had happened in class. Instead, he shrank into the shadows, creeping down the hallway. But then it happened again. The shadows moved. They transformed into spectral shapes, reaching for his neck. Even his own shadow turned on him. Sharp teeth, spindly arms, jagged claws. The skull necklace under his shirt was glowing again. Jamal bolted down the hall, away from the monstrous shadows, but they chased after him, stretching down the hall with dark claws. They clung to the crevices and cracks in the corners, where the light didn't reach fully. The shadow monsters were gaining on him. Adrenaline coursing through him. Jamal cut around the corner. The skull necklace flared brighter. He thought about hiding in the janitor's closet or the bathroom, but that would make it worse. It was darker in there. Instead, he ran for the exit, bolting past the security guard, who yelled, "Hey, kid, get back here!" But Jamal didn't care. He had to get away from the shadows. He burst outside into the bright sunlight. Only then did the shadow monsters vanish. The second they hit the threshold of the door where sunlight fell, they evaporated like smoke. The security guard chased after him, snagging his arm and yanking him back toward the school. "Wait, did you see them?" Jamal stammered. I can't go back there." The security guard frowned at him. His sweat-stained uniform stuck to his pudgy frame. "See what?" he growled, narrowing his eyes. "The shadows. They were chasing me," Jamal managed. "I swear it." "Nice try, kiddo," he said with a chuckle. "What I saw was you trying to skip school. You're lucky I was just giving you a warning this time. Next time, it's straight to detention." Jamal stared back into the school, his heart hammering in his chest. Sweat poured down his face. But there were no shadow monsters waiting to get him. The hallway looked completely normal. Stranger yet, the security guard hadn't been able to see them. The guard gave him a funny look. "You okay? You look a little sick." "Yeah, I'm fine, Jamal lied, blinking to clear his head. He knew he couldn't answer honestly. The guard wouldn't believe him. The truth was, he felt really far from fine. Were his eyes playing tricks on him? Or was this the Shadow Man punishing him for running away? Next year's pep rallies are gonna be the bomb, Malik said, sitting at a packed table surrounded by his adoring fan club. Just wait. Still feeling shaken, Jamal tucked his head down and headed for the other side of the cafeteria with his lunch tray. I wish that could be me for once, he whispered to himself. At that moment, someone shoved him from behind. Jamal tripped forward, his milk carton spilling all over him and soaking his clothes. But somehow he managed to stop himself before he hit the floor. Slowly he turned. Look, Invisible Boy's talking to himself, Colton sneered, glaring at Jamal. His friends cracked up. Just wait for gym class, Colton added in a low voice. He clutched his fist. You're gonna pay big time for your little escape act yesterday. They left Jamal dripping with milk and dreading next period. He glanced over at Malik's table to see if there was an empty seat, but it was packed. There were even kids standing around the perimeter, just wanting to be close to his brother. Feeling dejected, Jamal slid into a seat at an empty table. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching him. Not that he needed to worry. After all, he was invisible. Jamal pulled out the skull necklace to examine it. It hadn't warned him about Colton. The eye sockets remained dark. Why aren't you glowing right now? He whispered. Why don't you protect me from Colton? The skull just stared back at him. He remembered how it had glowed around the Shadow Man, and then when the shadows attacked him in science class and the hallway. His grandmother's message flashed through his head. Beware of the shadows. This will protect you. That was when it clicked. The necklace wasn't supposed to protect him from everyday bullies. It was supposed to protect him from Dr. Facilier and whatever dark magic he had unleashed on Jamal. The shadow monsters had to be the Shadow Man's doing. He was probably mad that Jamal had refused to take his deal the other day. That was also why the necklace hadn't glowed in the alley when Colton and his friends started to bully him. That was why it was dark now. It all made sense. Also, that had to be why Dr. Facilier wanted it so badly. It held some kind of power over the Shadow Man, even though Jamal didn't understand it fully. But then, another anxious thought raced into his head. If the necklace really did have power over the Shadow Man, then what was Dr. Facilier willing to do to get it? The shadow monsters might only be the beginning. A hand grabbed his shoulder. Jamal jumped. Wow, you look like you've just seen a ghost, said someone with a familiar voice. It was only Riley, her eyes fixed on the skull necklace, but he quickly tucked it away. Mind if I join you? It's a free country, Jamal said, hating how bitter he sounded. He wished he could be excited that Riley wanted to hang out with him, but he knew that once she met his brother, she would forget about him. Not like anyone else is clamoring for the privilege of sitting with me. He couldn't help it. His eyes darted over to Malik and his fan club across the cafeteria. Riley followed his gaze to his twin brother. You know, there are worse things than eating alone, she said. Trust me, this is my 5th school in the last 2 years. You get used to it, Invisible Boy. Ugh, you heard that? Jamal actually wanted to disappear. Hey, I've been called worse, Riley said with a snort. Plus, I told you, invisibility powers rule. If I'm so invisible, why can you see me? Jamal asked, pushing his tray away. His appetite had fled too. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible, Riley said, popping a chicken nugget in her mouth. And at least you have a brother. I'm an only child, and it's not very cool, especially when your dad has to move for work, which means you have to move too. Yeah, that must be tough, Jamal said, feeling something strange, a hopeful stirring in his chest. He risked a glance at Riley. Their eyes met, and she smiled. a genuine smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. Was this what it was like to have a friend? A real one? Well, I'm hoping this time we stay here, Riley went on. My grandma lives out in the bayou, and my mama wants to be closer to her roots. Wow, in the bayou? Jamal said. I didn't realize anyone lived out there. I've just heard the old legends, the ones about the witches. Boo! Riley said, making him jump. And she's not a witch. Not in the way you're thinking. Not like the Salem stuff. Let's just say Grandma is a bit different, she said with a mysterious smile. But I love her. Sometimes I think she might be my best friend. That's pretty cool, Jamal said, wishing he'd had that kind of relationship with his grandmother. Mine just died last month. We weren't very close, but she did leave me this. He pulled the skull necklace out of his shirt. Riley's eyes fixed on it and widened. It was almost like she recognized it, like she'd seen the necklace before. He opened his mouth to ask her about it when raucous cheering broke out across the cafeteria. My fellow classmates, Malik said, rising to his feet in an impromptu victory speech, I want to thank you for the honor of being your class president next year. Applause broke out, followed by cheers of Go Malik and Mr. President. Riley rose to her feet and joined the class in clapping for Malik. She was no longer paying attention to Jamal. This was what always happened. Soon enough, she'd forget that he existed. Jamal just couldn't stand it anymore. Not after what he'd been through that day. Sorry, but I've got to go, he said to Riley before dumping his tray and fleeing from the cafeteria. Riley watched him leave with a strange expression on her face. So much for my chance at having an actual friend, Jamal thought. Why did his brother always ruin everything for him? He pulled up his hoodie and hurried into the hall, wishing he could really disappear. He was tempted to run away and skip school altogether. He could sneak out the back door and avoid the security guard this time. Gym class was his next period, and that meant he'd have to face Colton and his friends. It would be worse than the previous year's awful wedgie incident. As he continued down the hall, it seemed to grow darker and more shadowy. His heart began to pound. How could he be so stupid and wander off alone? Suddenly, his shadow started to move on its own. It grabbed for Jamal's necklace. Get off me, he screamed, bolting down the hall. But unlike the earlier shadow monsters, he couldn't run from his own shadow. It followed him, reaching for his necklace again. There was no way to escape it. He felt the shadow fingers close around his throat. They pressed down, harder, harder, strangling him. Stars danced in his vision. He felt like he was about to pass out when he reached for the skull necklace and pulled it out. Help me, please, he choked out. Suddenly, the necklace burst to life, igniting with red light. The flare of light drowned out his shadow, making it vanish for a moment. The fingers disappeared from around his neck. He could breathe deeply, swallowing oxygen like it was cool water. He dashed down the hall. He didn't want to wait to see if the shadow would come back and attack him again. Next time might be worse. He felt certain it was the Shadow Man's doing. Dr. Facilier wanted that necklace, and he was willing to unleash those monsters on Jamal to get it.